Communication through the Orthodox Christian Network. We're here at the Greek Orthodox Church of St. George in Bethesda, Maryland. My name is Michael Howdis, your facilitator, and we're going to begin. Got a pretty packed room today. For those of you that don't come that often or are new, just to let you know, the theme this year has been beauty, goodness, and truth. We're trying to go a little deeper in understanding our faith from a different perspective. We all tend to be very cognitive and intellectual, and we start with facts and knowledge, intellectual knowledge first. But hey, John, we're trying to really go deeper this year and talk about and experience the beauty of Christ, which actually leads to understanding his goodness, which actually leads to our ability to really know the truth. So today we're going to continue a discussion on prayer, but I'm actually calling the talk or the discussion prayer and our relationship with God and with others. So what I want to do is lecture just very briefly and then open up the discussion, but I want to set the stage for our discussion. So I want to start off talking a little theologically about knowing relationships, this thing we call the nous, this innermost part of us, our capacity to know God and each other, and then open up, hopefully, a good discussion about how this applies to everyday life, the aspects of everyday life that we all go through. So I think we can make a case as people and as Christians, probably our deepest desire, or at least one of our deepest desires, is to know and to be known. That's why we have relationships with each other, is because it helps us know ourselves, and we want to know others. Just some things from Scripture, Jeremiah 1, verse 5, a very famous scripture when God says to Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." And that applies to all of us. God knows us because we come into existence at God's will and good pleasure. We say in our memorial services, may his or her memory be eternal. And this isn't to remind us to have nice thoughts about those that have passed on and have nice memories. This is saying when you're remembered by God, you continue to exist in God. And we're praying that that person is really in the book of life, is the resurrection of life, right? That this person will continue to be known by God, and thus we will continue to know that person as well. St. Paul, in a couple of different places in the scriptures, 1 Corinthians 13, verse 13, after his famous writing about love, he says at the end, "For we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but I shall know also I shall know just also as I am known." And he's talking about this time where we'll come face to face with Christ. We talked about it a few weeks ago, the awesome judgment seat of Christ, where we will see Christ and be known in a different way, a radically different way than the life we have now. If we're sheep, that is, not goats. And we're in the little caveats there. Paul also says in Galatians 4:9, "But now after you've known God, or rather are known by God, how is it you turn so quickly to the weak and beggarly elements?" He's really talking about our propensity to have this deep revelatory experience of God and each other, but then so quickly turn to dumb stuff, right? And we'll get into that a little bit. I came across a saying in a book I finished, and it's a famous saying. This particular book, Dr. Timothy Petitsis wrote, but he reminded us that we often say that a lone Christian is no Christian, right? So some Christians misguidedly will think it's just between me and God, nobody else, and that's not really true. We've talked about that, and we know that spiritually. We know it scientifically. We've talked the last few weeks about brain development and how it doesn't even happen without interaction, or we've talked about isolation and social development and how people form in relationships with other people. But due to sin, we mess this up. And we mess up knowing God and each other, and we mess up relationships quite a bit. And sometimes we let the shame of sin or what's going on, or whether it's about ourselves or ill feeling towards others, result in isolating behavior or divisions or pettiness that just really is not of the way of Christ. And I mentioned this book a few times, but have anybody read The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis? Okay, in that, it's a really short book. It's a fictional book where Lewis imagines a bus ride from hell to heaven. But Okay, and they used to do a one-act play, but he portrays hell as a little dingy town with gates wide open. People are free to come and go, but they choose to stay, and it's really small. But everybody in the town is trying to get further from each other, right? And so, and I think, we see. I don't know if it's really prevalent to the everyday person, but certainly in news and other things, you see a lot of this type of behavior, divisions, isolations, all this stuff. A couple more things, then I'll open it up. We see the importance of the relational aspect of our being. We see it right in the beginning of the Bible, right in Genesis, right? The triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is creating out of love to share his light with us, right? We see that aspect. We see Adam created, and what's God do? He invites Adam to name the animals, participate in the creation, in this relationship. Then, of course, we see Adam and Eve, and we see God taking the place closest to Adam's heart and forming Eve out of that, and then uniting them. And Sunday school kids will joke sometimes. We talk about and Adam knew his wife Eve, and they may snicker because to know is very reductionist. They think it's all about sex in this sex obsessed culture. But it's not really what it meant. The language more was for a true knowing, a true intimacy, a true bonding and understanding before sin made it what it was. And it's beyond intellect. So I want to just stop here and open up. What does it really mean to know? As Orthodox Christians, what does that really mean? There's a certain word we'll use for it sometimes. I'm trying to be as prescriptive with this question as possible, but it's hard to get so precise. But there's something beyond just cognitive intellect. There's a word we use to describe knowing. Anybody know? Intimacy. Mm-hmm. It's along those lines. It's something deeper than just here, right? It's the full experience.
Compassion, you're putting yourself in the place of others.
Compassion, empathy. Nostos? Yeah. That's
Gnosi from Greek.
Yeah, say it.
Gnosi.
I can't say Greek. I'm terrible. Maria, you're gonna say
Understanding. That's what Gnosi.
Yeah. No, the word I'm looking for is noetic.
Yeah, noetic.
Noetic. That's where we get the word nous from. So I'm going to read you a quote. For some of you, I forget who's not on what list or whatever, but on the quotes of the day, I put these quotes out fairly recently about knowing God. And I'm just going to read you the first one. This is from Father Stephen Freeman. He said, "Perhaps the most salient aspect of the sacramental life is something that has almost been forgotten within contemporary Christianity, noetic experience." And this is Father Stephen talking, not me. "The fact that I will now be required to explain the very meaning of noetic experience for my readers makes my point. In the writing of the Church Fathers, it's assumed that this is the true character of the saving knowledge of God. Noetic refers to that knowledge that is acquired by the nous, an aspect of the soul that is uniquely the place where we encounter God. It's not the place of the passions and emotions, nor is it the place of discursive reasoning. Rather, it is the place in which we know," he puts in quotes, "by a participatory knowledge that is sometimes described as perception. We lack a good vocabulary for speaking about noetic experience precisely because our culture has abandoned this once essential mode of perception." And so the word, it derives from the word that we ultimately get the nous from, right? And so I just want to briefly talk about the nous, and then we'll move on. But I think when we say the nous, I mean, we've heard, if you study this at all in Orthodoxy or talk to anybody about it, you're going to ask 10 different Orthodox Christians and probably get 10 different answers, all of which are probably correct to an extent, but they're just different because it's a very hard thing to define. So when I say nous, does anybody want to volunteer how they would define it or what they think? Tina.
This is a very uneducated way of saying it, but it's sort of the center, deepest part of your heart.
It's not uneducated. That's correct. It's not the only correct, but it's definitely correct. Maria, you started, or Mary?
No,
Okay.
I was
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
it's the heart.
Yep.
It's from the heart.
So
Everything
I
from
looked up the
heart.
word gnosis for Greek. It says understanding spiritual mysteries.
Yeah, it's what enables us, and it's what I mean. The nous is the part of us that actually enables prayer, enables so much of who we are.
In communication with the Holy Spirit.
It's what able it's what it in the context of knowing and relationships. It's what enables us to really know from a revelatory aspect, which is a lot of times that would be dismissed today, because if you try to tell somebody, I just know it through revelation, where's your proof? I mean, it's like, it's just, or you're out there. But we all know that sometimes we just know something. I mean, I'm sure everybody in this room has had this experience where you just know something. You can't explain it, but you just know it, and you know it. You know that it's real, and you know that it's right. This is the difference we see in the Gospels between people that encounter Christ or people that read the Gospels and know Christ through the Gospels, or just know about Christ, right? It's the nous, and it's and in the sacramental life, we're constantly cleansing, purifying, keeping that line open, if you will, to receptivity from God. It's some of the Holy Fathers would actually talk about it like a sensory organ. It's just another sense, and it's a part of us that makes, like I said, makes knowing Christ and everything we do in prayer possible. But there's so many words. I read this book recently by Jean-Claude Lachey. I don't know if anybody's familiar with him. He's a very deep modern thinker, writes a lot about orthodoxy. He wrote a book, Mental Disorders and Spiritual Healing, Teachings from the Early Christians. And it was fascinating because you see in these writings, the Holy Fathers, they lacked our science of the day, but they had the science of their day. And that's what they used. But they had such a deep understanding about the holistic nature of a person. And so my limited experience with functional medicine or more holistic medicine, I'm like, you guys ought to read this book, because we're scratching the surface of what they already knew about the integrated nature, the triune nature, body, mind, and soul of the human person. And it'd be wonderful if we could recover that. But they use so many words to describe the nous. They call it the principle of consciousness in a psychological or moral sense, the capacity of human beings for self-determination, the principle of liberty in us, the intuitive intelligence, the faculty of contemplation, reason, logos, thinking. I mean, it goes on. And I'm like, okay, this is starting to hurt my head. I just know that it's important, right? And it's the part of us that we're nurturing as we live the sacramental life. And I think the more we get this and we grow, the easier it is for us to overcome and not react to insult or other things that allow us to play right into the devil's playbook of isolation and division and difference. I mean, I think the more we get this, the more we can maintain loving relationships. So, having said that, let me just stop and ask if there's any questions or comments about anything I just said before I get into what we're really the main meat of what we're going to talk about today. Go ahead, Nick.
These are very difficult to explain concepts.
Yeah,
But
that's
when you
why
talk
I'm
about
struggling.
noetic,
Mhm.
are we strictly talking about the nous, which I thought it was, rather than the integration of mind, body, and soul?
Both. I mean, that's why. So noetic is, and this is the way the Holy Fathers describe it is, they're not like body, mind, and soul aren't necessarily three things, right? They're integrated, and it's all the energies of God in us. So, and you're right, it's really hard to talk about. So that's why I'm trying to do my best to explain it in the limited way that I can.
For example, I heard that, from what I remember, the noetic realm is where the angels exist.
Yeah. And we exist there too. It's just because we're given the same principle, the same properties of the angels to an extent. We have one more with our physicality, and that's why so much in our faith, everything, even our prayers, we try to remember the use of our body in our prayers, and the full integrated experience when we pray. That's why whether we come to church and we cross ourselves, or we bow, or we kneel, or at home, hopefully we have an icon corner, we're involving our whole being in the prayer. It doesn't mean that you can't be driving along in your car and something hits you, you just have like a cognitive prayer. But I'm saying, all of our prayer life is built on integrating body, mind, and soul. But I want to kind of move away from this. Not move away, but I want to bring this down a little bit to what I'll, just for sake, lack of better terms, more practical discussion. So we know that we have this news, and we know that this thing, this part of us where the angels dwell, that we're supposed to be angelic Christians on this planet towards, loving other people. But how does that play into our relationships? What's in other words, what's so critical about our relationships when it comes to our prayer life and just to our salvation? Hi, Angela Key from Canada. Sorry, people are joining online. We have a big room today, so we might not get as much talking as I wanted. People get intimidated. Go ahead.
Are you leading towards loving others, and that our existence on earth, God really wants us to be loved? God is love, and He wants us to be loving people.
Yeah.
And to me, the noose is, when I say the central core of a heart, it's like if you're peeling back, or taking a rose and pulling all the petals back, that maybe on the outside is, oh, you love to see the sun, or you love to see the ocean, maybe you love your dog, and all these loves, but then you get way down into the deepest part.
Yeah, I like that.
And it's also trying to know the love of God and tearing away all the layers of your own self to realize who you really are and what God wants you to be. Because we can fool ourselves who we are.
Yeah, it's
and
good.
If we get to that level, then maybe we can love others more.
It's almost stripping away the false notion of self, or the ego-based focus of self, to die to that part, to know our real selves. And as we know, like Paul said, to know and be known, we know ourselves through Christ, and we begin to know and see others that way too. And if you know yourself, for example, very practically, and you're in a tense situation, a tough situation, and someone's being insulting, whatever, you can not react to it because you know yourself, and you can see that person differently, and try to see what's going on, but perhaps deeper, and be more less reactionary based on your ego. But I really want to. What I'm trying to get here is, kind of setting that up. Hopefully, we understand that to an extent. Is how it plays in so many aspects of our life, just our daily relations, our education, our therapies, I wrote a bunch of stuff down here. How we deal with trauma. I mean, this really applies. Maria, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we had talked last week about remember addiction and how it was dealt with. You remember that conversation? Or
You mean with the brain?
Yeah.
We were talking about the brain because we talked about something on television that I had seen. They talked about that. How can we change our brain?
Mm-hmm.
And there was a book written by a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and basically he said that for the most part, for a lot of these people that are shooting people and have a lot of suicidal issues and so forth, and then they land up in prison.
Yeah.
And then what happens is that basically, they're let out and nothing's being done for them. But when they took pictures of the brains of all of these individuals, it was totally different. And so he was saying in the book that you can change your brain in certain things that you do, certain things you eat, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the big things he said was, how do we change our child to be a Democrat or a Republican? I'm not getting political. I'm just saying,
Right.
be a Democrat or a Republican. And
By
one
the
of the
size
biggest
of the brain.
things, yeah. Yeah. So
I think we have both sitting around this table, just so you know,
And I know, right?
over my dead body.
Just switch topics. So what he said was, is how that parent relates to that child and what that child sees that parent doing. So it's that interpersonal relationship that is being given, and that's what really drives the child to be the way that you want that child to be.
Yeah, you know,
And that's what we were.
you brought up like Democrat, Republican. I could bring up sports teams, right? The reason there's so much fervor and passion around things like that is because it's lived in the home.
Yeah.
Now, we don't do our faith that way. We send to Sunday school, teach a couple
Yeah.
cognitive, learn these facts and figures, memorize the 10 Commandments.
Mhm.
But when it's not lived in the home with that fervor, it's not going to stick.
Yep.
So it's relational.
Mhm.
Yeah, and kind of, I guess related to that, I'm fine, thanks, Andy, is that, and we can make, by the way, we can have another topic one day about the size of your brain, whether you're Republican or Democrat or independent. Might be lively and more entertaining than what I'm going to get into. So, yeah. So we'll see if we can be true Orthodox Christians and not come to blows, right? I have my doubts. So there was a TED talk. I don't know if anybody saw it, and you can look this up online. They took these rats and they put I think it was heroin. They put a very addictive agent in the water bottles in these 2 terrariums. And anybody that's ever encountered heroin addiction or fentanyl, you know these things are incredibly addictive. It stimulates the pleasure center of the brain. There's all kinds of stuff. Smarter people in this room could explain it better than I can. I know from personal experience, seeing it and living with people that had this, it is incredibly addictive. So they put, if I remember the experiment right, they had a group of rats in one terrarium, same water bottle, and they had one rat in this other terrarium. The group of rats never got addicted. They didn't even go to the water bottle. Whereas the one rat got incredibly addicted. And so then what they did was, it might have been in France. You have to check me on the specifics of this. The generalities I'm getting right. They use this model of relationship-based rehabilitation for addicts. And what they found was I shouldn't say they found it. What their theory is and what they're trying to prove, and they may be right, is that the greatest cause of addiction is not the drug itself. It was the person's mental, emotional, psychological state. If you're familiar with Scott Peck, the famous, he's dead now. He wrote the famous bestseller in the late 70s, Road Less Traveled, a bunch of other books. He talked about how when he was in Vietnam, his platoon or whatever the unit is, remember this? They're all doing heroin to cope.
Right.
But when they came back, most of them were not addicted. It was a group. But see, the preserving agent in this stuff, or the healing agent, is the relationship. And that's what I think, we talk about, we want to pass on our faith. We can't just pass it on as facts and figures, and it's got to be relational. And even then, sometimes it doesn't necessarily stick. It depends on the person. You just have to, sometimes, especially with your kids, you kind of have to bide your time and see what happens over time. But it's all relationship based. And that's even right in the beginning of the Bible, where, God chose us to be his image bearers. That's what image and likeness is. We're supposed to be image bearers, and image bearers to grow in his likeness. And the tragedy of not doing that is sometimes what we see. When you see cultures and societies come apart through such divisiveness, like Christ said, you're worshiping your father, the devil. They all thought they knew. Remember the Judeans? They thought they knew because they studied the scriptures. They were PhDs equivalent. They could tell you everything about the law, but they didn't really know. So it's. But this applies to other aspects of life. I kind of want to open up the discussion if anybody always wants to kind of freeform talk about where this type of, we talked about maybe an addiction or psychological stuff, but this applies across the board to all aspects of our life. Go ahead, John.
Just in terms of the way we live our faith, I listened to what Father Stephanos had to offer in the sermon today.
Mm-hmm.
And he spoke about how the epistle today really relates to how we deal with one another within our community. and how we all support one another, we love one another. We talked about this a lot last week, right? How prayer is something that we do together as a community, we just prayer that we do by ourselves, but part of what drives our faith is our ability to engage, to participate in the divine liturgy together, to support one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. But then it's also a matter of how we deal outside of our community. I think he kept emphasizing the word outreach today.
Yeah, you did.
And the example that we set by the life that we lead, and it's not just our internal faith, but our actual works, our actions, how we love one another, how we set an example for others who we won't proselytize to, we won't teach or preach to directly, but because we live a life that we aspire to be as Christ-like as possible, we open the door for others to possibly want to encounter Christ as well. So I think that's also a very important dimension of what we're talking about here in terms of relationships with one another as Orthodox Christians, but how we deal with the outside world, outside of our Orthodox community.
They need to see Christ in us. And sometimes that's going to happen without any mention of Christ to begin with,
That's
right?
right.
It's the light of Christ. That's why he said a city on a hill, whatever he said about, shine your light before.
Light of the world.
Yeah, be the light of the world. Go ahead, Alan.
So I was actually thinking that same thing, and how that, the more developed our news, like the more easily you can have these difficult conversations or deal with conflict, et cetera. And how I see every day throughout my work life how I work in a large office, and there are some people who are active in their churches and some people who aren't very opposed to Christianity, whatever type of religion. And it's easy to see it. There have been conflict. I haven't been present when that's happened. And I think that, again, like, you have to be you have to be very adept at dealing with that sort of thing if you're ever going to reach those people who obviously are hurting. There was another conversation that I was somewhat a part of, in which I think everyone does long for connection. Those people who are isolated and in addiction, they're longing for that connection. They're longing for healing. And I just think that it's, people will demonstrate that longing for their fathers, longing for family. And it's just such a painful thing in our society. And I don't really know. I guess it's just when you're dealing with it with your own family, with, our children or with whoever, I think that if we can just keep that like Christ-like, actually remember that you have to be a representation of Christ's humility and just.
I think we saw in today's gospel about Zacchaeus, we saw something really important because, I know we talked about this before, but, Zacchaeus was a tax collector, his own people. That's the lowest form of scum you could be back then, But Christ did not treat him with any form of revulsion because of his sin. And it's really hard for us sometimes, I think, to encounter certain types of sin and not treat the person with revulsion. I encountered something the other day. Somebody was confessing to me something they were doing, and it's not good. But I was very careful not to make the person feel any shame. And it was, okay, I understand the struggle. You're not the only one. But then just trying to maintain the relationship. And I even asked the person point blank. I said, what do you want from me right now? Do you want me to pray with you, which I will? Do you want me just to be a listening ear? Do you want me to swoop in and start telling you everything you need to do? Which my tendency would be to do, just typical older person, just lecture, do this. But it's the important thing is to maintain the relationship and not make that person feel reviled because of what they've done. And I think for us, we need to understand. I think we need to understand what holiness really means. So when I say holiness, what's just stream of consciousness, what comes to mind? Anybody? Piety. Okay. What else?
Just being a good person and being following Christ, what he said wants us to do.
Right. Following Christ. What about purity? Anybody equate it with that? Morality. But I would say be careful of that, right? Be careful of that, because holiness is really, it's in the struggle. So I read something a priest wrote the other day, and I actually sent it to this person because the priest said, okay, so you fail one day, whatever you're struggling with, right? But what about the 6 days before that where you didn't fail, right? You were on you were on the path of holiness day. So you fail and you pick yourself back up and you continue to struggle. So holiness is in the struggle. So when we encounter someone struggling like that, and let's say they're struggling with something particularly disgusting to us, right? Whether it's a sexual sin or a financial sin or something that we may not have done ourselves or done to the extent. And I think our tendency would be to be repulsed by it or be judgmental. But like, so I was reminded this person the other day, I was like, well, for 5 days, you were fine. So you're doing pretty good. So you fail. So get your butt back up and continue. And when you fall again, get your butt back up and continue. It's that simple. As long as you're sincerely struggling, and only you know that. I mean, we know we're just full of the wrong things inside. We're just fooling ourselves. And I think that's hard because we can all talk about maintaining relationships, but the rubber meets the road when you encounter somebody else's darkness. That's when you're really. This is where this stuff really needs to take hold of your heart, and you really need to put it into practice. And I would suggest to you, and you guys could comment on this. I think it's hard. That's okay. I think it's hard. You have to get past your emotions, I think. Thoughts on that? And your feelings, because sometimes to do the right thing, you have to master your own stuff.
The danger of a grandchild giving an
You got an iPhone? Yeah.
7 years old is exciting.
Yeah. Put them on speaker. We'll dial it back a little bit.
I'm in my Sunday school class.
If you need to step out and talk to him in the context of relationships, it might be more important than listening to me drone on. So,
He's wondering where I am. He's coming over.
Okay. Yeah. So, thoughts on that struggle?
Let me, I'm not sure if I'm along the same path that you've laid out, Michael, or not, but one of the things that I've grappled with is, I think we all have an innate sense of what we should be like in terms of our relationships, especially with people that we don't like, or that we judge, or that we condemn, or that, as you put it, repel us, right? But then I take it a little step further when I think about Christ's Sermon on the Mount and the standards that he sets that are almost impossible for most of us to adhere to with anyone, even the people that we love or don't repel us. So, when you're struck, turn the other cheek. Very difficult.
Hello from Cyprus.
When you're asked to loan a certain amount of money, loan double that amount. When somebody asks you for this garment, give them your outer garment. Keep giving and giving and giving. And I'm wondering, to what extent are we meeting Christ's standards by just loving I don't want to say just, I'm not minimizing, by loving one another the way we define loving one another properly, right? Not judging, not condemning, but then not going that extra step and giving more than what is humanly or commonly possible for most of us. Do we still fail Christ's standards?
That's weird. I think I'll offer my 2 cents, and then others can chime in. I think that's where the paradox comes in. I think the answer is yes. We do fail. We're failing all the time. But what does Christ say? Be a branch to my vine. As long as we're united to him, he takes our failure on himself. And then we're not failing in that sense. But we still need to continue to strive and to grow while we're failing. And this is where I think the devil gets us, because our egocentricity makes us look at our failure. Oh, I'm failing. We spend too much time looking at that, as opposed to looking at the success and what we need to do even better. And I think it takes a little bit of this is where we have the gift of our will and our cognition to do things to help us give. I think I mentioned this before. And I'm going to say right now, I struggle with this every day. I wonder if I give enough, if I do enough. I mean, I think we all do. But I remember a few Lents ago, I started putting a certain amount of money aside each day for Lent because I wanted to give. I just sensed to myself, I have too much in life. I'm not giving enough. But it became a practice now so I have this giving fund sitting aside. Now, of course, I look at it and I think I'm still not giving enough, but it's my way of trying to be, I'm not trying to earn Christ's favor. I just know that this is what we're supposed to do. And I probably fail at it. I think we all do. I think most of us around this table have some degree of affluence compared to the rest of the world. Let's face it.
Well, I mean, quite honestly, according to the scriptures and what we know, Panahia was the one that was, completely without sin. All of us are trying. And in fact, I'm probably saying things that you already know, but like the Greek word amartia comes from the sport of archery, and whether you can reach the target, and amartia is you're off the mark. And so, in terms of like failure, actually we're all failing.
Yeah.
But it's that struggle, and you're trying, and
and in this, just so you know, in this room, Nick, there's a lot of people around this table, and we all know a lot and don't know a lot at the same time. So we don't ever worry about what we know, what we don't know. We just say it over and over because again, we talk about there's knowing and there's knowing. So sometimes. So Evie of Cyprus just asked a question real quick. I want to address it. Is charity and offering our tithing the same thing? In other words, if we donate to charity, will it be considered as a tithing? They're two separate things, but I think what's important is we just have to evaluate our hearts all the time in our giving. And it's not just our money; it's our time. It's probably my guess would be where we fail most in giving as human beings isn't so much of our resource. It's just so much of not treating others as interruption to our already busy day. And trusting that no matter what we have planned out, whatever comes our way, to trust that it'll work out anyway if we just give time to that person in front of us that we need to. I think a lot of us. Go ahead, Mary. You're going to say something.
A dear friend, a monk, always says we're always under construction. Staying plugged in, the sacraments, prayer, accountability, friendships, relationships. We're always going to be failing, not going in, I'm going to fail, so, oh, well. No, that's not. We're always striving. But if we keep in mind that we're always under construction, it makes it a little bit more easier for us to refocus, remold, get back to a friend, get back to maybe your spiritual father or priest or whomever, and have that conversation. Many times we've all had the conversation, Michael and John, myself, Maria. We're busy and we get interrupted. Somebody has a situation or a need, and we pause and say, you're always going to be busy. If you have discernment, step away for a moment. That person may be reaching out, and it's a critical time for that person. So giving of ourselves is really, really important, I always say. And sometimes I'm not able to give, but those around me give back to me, whether it be by prayer, encouragement, lifting up. So
that's why I want us to be a cheerful giver. Exactly. But it's hard. It's hard. I'll confess the other night I had everything arranged. I set up. I was down the basement. It's time for the football game, right? I just want to watch this game. All of a sudden, I got this message about a person in crisis. I need to do something. I was like, it's like, Lord, help me be cheerful, because I'm not cheerful right now, But then I looked at it, I'm like, here I get put to the test, right? It's. So I interrupted the sacred nature of the football game and did what I had to do. You can relate, right? Yeah. Okay, good. I want everybody to know. So, but it's hard. But you know what? In all seriousness, so what? So I wasn't particularly cheerful. So I probably didn't have the exact right heart at that moment. It was more important that I tried to help than evaluate myself, and that's what I'm getting at. It's hard not to evaluate ourselves because we if we're around this table right now, we all want to be more Christ-like. That's why we're here. But it's getting to that place of self-forgetfulness that's more important. And that's where the relationships come into play, because the more we have a sincere heart for other people, we'll get to that place, because our concern becomes more for them than others. But it's hard.
Michael, lots of times doing something loving doesn't feel like it at the moment.
No.
If you're a parent, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? So, at the moment, that's love. Love, isn't always doing something wonderful in a state of, contemplative bliss. I mean, sometimes it's under fire, right?
Our relationships are
either emotionally within you or stuff going on or in your family.
I mean, our relationships aren't necessarily defined by the positive feeling and emotion we have at the moment. Sometimes it's in spite of the negative feeling and emotion, or just trying to do our best to help the person in our life. I mean, like we all, not all of us, but some of us, well, we all have loved ones we want to give to, whether they're our kids, friends, whatever. And I think it's our natural tendency to want to give. You know, your child asks you for something. I know my daughter, she asks, I just want to give it. But I also know that's not always great for her development. So I'll, put some parameters in place, especially now a young person trying to manage money. And I've had to recently train myself to let her go without. And Al, you may be listening. Sometimes she listens. I found out later because she'll sneak in later. I heard what you said about me, and I think so you know what I'm talking about. But it's like, you got to do these things, and they don't always feel good, right? Because and we're also trained. Let's face it, we're trained with nowadays our arts and our literatures and our notions. There's this whole love has become sometimes reduced to a romantic type of love, and it was years uncounted. It was never about that. That wasn't how. We have a lot of reductionist way of thinking about things. Not that we're all bad. I mean, I don't mean to make it sound like modernity is all wrong, but certain aspects of things we just, sometimes it's just the relationship. You have to do the tough thing, or the thing doesn't feel so good. Not fun.
Well, fruits of the spirit, right there.
Well, it's funny. The fruit of the spirit, Galatians 5:22. Depending on what English interpretation you look at, sometimes there's a colon after love. So the thing is, everything flows from this understanding of love, versus love just being the first in the list of many. And love, as we know, is not easy, right? It's multidimensional, and that's Paul. In that, we tend to read it at weddings. America. We tend to read at weddings, certain weddings you go to, they read 1 Corinthians 13. Love is this, love is that. But pay attention to the words, right? Love is long suffering. Love is not, not boasting, it's a lot of things that aren't really easy, right? The long suffering part's the hardest part, right? Patience, endurance,
And self-control.
Self-control.
Because love and self-control keep everything together in between.
Self-control is hard.
It is.
It's very hard. Who loses self-control sometimes? Especially during a football game that's not going your way. Right? We all lose control. A couple other things. The Christian truth of relationships, it crosses every aspect. It's embedded in every aspect of our life. I'm thinking of teaching. My daughter recently was saying to Mary and I, she was saying, "Oh, this semester is so fun because the teacher's this and this class is that." And these are subjects she doesn't particularly like. And I said to her, I said, you realize why? She said, "Are you going to go get deep on me now, Dad?" I'm like, "Yeah, I am." I said, because the teacher is very relational. You're getting to know this professor. This professor is not just sitting back, lecturing and moving away. And most learning, true learning, comes through relationship. There's been some studies I read about recently where they actually measured the relatability and relational nature of the teacher versus not, and seeing how the brain processed. I'm thinking about when we taught, Mary Marie and I, when we taught the 9th through 12th graders. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most of the students, whether it was the three of us or just one of us or two of us, most of the students that we saw blossom, or I think we knew better. There was a relational dynamic. And a lot of times it was them seeking us, one of us, two of us, three of us. But I think we saw it. That's what I remember, at least. The ones that I see now that have gone on and really stuck with the faith. Yeah.
Even today, as parents, which is nice.
But I think what was, when I think back, I think I don't know if I flipped the switch, but you saw that the more we dialogued with them one-on-one or whatever, the more we got to know, you saw more of the learning, if you will. And some have even gone on to teach or went to Holy Cross. I was thinking of one in particular. You just see that more in the relational aspect of it. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, our relationships with other people, with everyone, is determined by our relationship that we have with Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is where you see the fruit of the Spirit in that person. Because it's how we pray, it's what we do every day. It's our relationship with Christ that makes us who we are. in order to be able to communicate, to other people. So,
Yeah, that's why I kind of clumsily tried to begin that whole thing about the noose and understanding ourselves and what's important. Yeah, and I think that it's going to be interesting to see how things continue to go in this post-COVID dynamic. But one of the things that, especially all this digital stuff, one of the things that's concerning is not cultivating a relationship with Christ corporately like we do at church. We're blessed here at this particular church because it's pretty thriving, really, when you look across the nation at Orthodox churches in this country. And we have fairly crowded liturgies. This room's got a big audience today, but we have big coffee hours, which is really not important too. And people give up their coffee hour to come here, so that's a sacrifice. But that's all important too. That's part of our liturgical experience, even just talking with friends and family after the liturgy. And but I wonder, as we continue this digital divide and we start going down this road, how that's going to play out in Orthodox Christianity in this country and just Christianity in general, because there really is no Christianity without the physical presence of each other.
You're reading my mind. There's been so much publicity this week about chat. Was it GPT?
Oh,
GPT.
And
artificial intelligence.
yeah, it is.
The what? I didn't.
Artificial intelligence.
Oh yeah, AI. Yeah.
Yeah, and this new computer that now it's functional, and you can type in, address this subject from the perspective of this person in the 1800s, and it immediately types out a really top-notch production. And these issues you're bringing up are very difficult for us to deal with today. I mean, they're so complex. But my God, once you have a computer educating your children and deciding what the standard, somebody throws this standard in there, and everything that comes out has
What
that.
Christianity is, right?
Yeah, truly. I mean, I think this is going to look like a very simple time in 30 years.
It's kind of scary if you've followed this at all. And I just do a little bit. There's other Orthodox Christians that could talk much more intelligently than I do, but I've learned from them, and they've been following this transhumanist movement for a while. All these brilliant minds out there creating all this stuff. Like, think of the social media people. Brilliant people, I suppose, right? By worldly standards, very successful by worldly standards. The idea was to unite people. I don't think it's doing it.
Not at all.
Not at all. It's doing the opposite. They're going to the bank on it, and they've introduced this. And I don't think. Let's get me wrong. I don't think they had ill intent. I don't think somebody.
Oh,
I don't think.
I differ. No. The algorithms are for you to keep on looking at the things that interest you, and it's usually the things that divide people that get you looking. And,
Right.
And so when you say, back then, they said, Zuckerberg said that this is going to be wonderful. No, Zuckerberg's algorithms are to divide people.
Oh yeah, it's slot machine. They knew all the addictive technology they're putting in it. But what I'm saying is, I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm just now I'm going into my opinion, which take it for what it's worth, and maybe worth nothing. I don't think Zuckerberg sat down though, and really calculated the level of evil things that would happen because of what he introduced. Although, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, the algorithms are also keeping from you the other side's arguments. So
Yes,
you're
absolutely.
becoming
Which-
and the real crisis, I believe, and we're in the middle of it, has come to the point where you get you can make a lot more money, and you can get a lot more votes pandering to people's misconceptions
That's right.
than correcting them.
And the thing with the algorithms is what one social media platform has one algorithm, another one has another algorithm, and another one has another algorithm. So it depends on what social media platform you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
So
We
it's not
actually-
even across the board.
No.
Yeah, we brought
You may be right, Nick.
in this forum a couple of years ago.
I stand corrected.
Somebody in this forum a couple of years ago brought up it was either a movie or a documentary. I remember seeing it about about the algorithms. And the thing was, if you believe cheese, the moon made out of green cheese, guess what? Everything you get out of that is going to be slanted there. And after a while, you say, well, now I went into whatever, Google or Facebook, whatever, and I put it in there, and here's what it says. So your tendency, no matter what the subject is to say, well, this is it. When you're really not getting a balanced, I'm thinking about when I was a kid and I'd watch the news, there was an attempt for balanced stuff, and now, everything seems to be, you're not going to get that balanced view,
Well,
or no matter what it is.
the other thing too is that people that are using the social media are taking a step further. Because I was doing a little research for somebody the other day, and they tell you, like, within the special event industry, okay, I'm using these 3 platforms, but on this platform, I'm looking to create something where you can't miss looking at me every day. Like, you are so yearning to see what we're doing next, behind the scenes, whatever, that it's gone a step further than even the algorithms. It's gone to how you project to an audience and how you hook them into what you believe, what you feel, what they should be seeing, et cetera, et cetera.
This is why I think
it's gone way beyond even the algorithm.
I think from a relational perspective, this is why it's so important. I was listening to I don't remember who said this, but they said, if you find yourself, if you have a political position or any other type of position, a faith-based position, and you find yourself so angry or so this or so that about the opposite perspective, you really need to look in the mirror and ask yourself, what's missing in you that you're getting that level of incensed? And that's hard, right? Because we all have our strong convictions, and that's okay. And I really think I'm scared about this demonizing differences and demonizing the opposition. It's one thing to vehemently disagree, and disagree. That's okay. Who cares, right? I mean, it's when you start demonizing, and that's what I think this digital divide is really feeding into. And that's why, as Orthodox Christians or Christians, we really gotta, like, all of us as individual persons have to really be careful and check our own self, even if we're feeling it. Don't act on it. Recognize the value of someone's different opinion.
And then they take it a step further because, and I've noticed different news sites do different things.
I see you talking down there.
They have a comments box where you can just weigh in. And so that further incites, because people are weighing in and their various viewpoints, and they don't censor. I mean, they censor to a degree, but sometimes they don't. And I've seen some things I can't believe people write.
I think we have a couple comments today, and this is good because this is a Christian forum, and we have good, respectful comments. I've been doing this now I think live for 7 years, and I could probably count on my hands how many bad comments I've gotten or attack comments. But I think personally, be careful of reading those comment forums. Be careful of evaluate ourselves by how what we're taking in affects our love for others and the relationships we have for others. And if it's causing you to feel like this all the time, stop. Right? If it's so anti-Christian, a lot of this stuff. Go ahead, John.
Well, yes, it's anti-Christian, but I would add one more thing.
Please.
It's relatively brand new to humanity.
Right, and we're learning how to deal with it.
For the whole history of humanity, from the creation, we've dealt with one another as human beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And either as family members, as friends, as fellow villagers, as fellow citizens, but as men and women sitting across the table or gathered someplace together in a communal or corporate environment. And now we're dealing with people in a very dehumanized way. They're simply an electronic identity. I don't have to think of them as human beings. Oftentimes I hide anonymously behind my comments. And so it's kind of like different gradations, different levels of humanity that we see in one another. And I think for the most part, as we deal with one another as actual flesh and blood human beings, even if we disagree on things, which we always will, we see them as creatures of God, as our brothers and sisters in Christ, or that we, like we said before, are looking to maybe bring closer to Christ through our actions and whatnot. But if somebody's a complete stranger and they're an electronic identity and I don't know anything about them and I don't care about them at all, I can say the most vicious of things and then go back to my regular life. And so I think we're entering a very dangerous experiment in human relationships that goes back to what you were talking about, Michael. How do we deal with one another from that relational perspective? And this is something that we've never done before as a species, as human beings, as creatures of God. And let's deal with one another as complete strangers in a place where it's safe to not care about what other people are like as men and women.
It's taking that dynamic of being in a car and giving someone the finger versus you wouldn't do it if you bumped into them walking through this doorway, right? You just say, excuse me, right?
Or if they sat at my table.
And extending it exponentially. The good news is, you look at Christianity, God has always preserved everything through small remnants, right? And the smallest of things has led to the biggest of changes. So, I think this is a scary time. I think there's all kinds of gunk and garbage going on out there and all kinds of tough stuff, but we shouldn't get cynical or lose hope whatsoever. Father Stephanos talked about today, you want to change the world, change yourself. Jordan Peterson has said something similar. I mean, it's nothing that hasn't been said before, but every generation needs voices to say it that resonate with people. But the more we ourselves, each one of us as individual persons, holds this truth in mind and tries to be Christ-like as possible, we can measure the effect in a positive way. So we just have to keep doing it. And I think for ourselves, from a relationship, we just got to take stock of what we're feeding ourselves and make sure we're not adding to the problem. It's very easy to do. We've all been guilty of it, I think. I know I have, at different times, and I'm looking at myself. I'm like, that's not who I want to be. So enough of this. Go ahead, Tina.
I really like your use of demonization, because if we think of it that way, it really is. We've never seen in this country that I remember such demonizing other people.
I agree. I've never seen it.
I love in our bulletin that it says that prayer about how we should pray for the world so that to stop this hatred. It's really frightening. Although you try to think back to the Bible, when even Christ's disciples said to him, "Why are you talking to this Sumerian woman?" So, I mean, there's always been demonizing other people.
It's just the tools of it
Right.
have allowed for exponential harm. I actually don't think people are any worse than they've ever been. It's just that now these barriers have been broken down.
Right.
I mean,
People are voicing it the way they may have never done.
well, there's just barriers and boundaries that are no longer existing. Like,
Well, I saw an article the other day where the cop went into a school and was saying that this generation coming up do not have the boundaries that prior generations had, and the teachers are scared and the principals are scared. And I listen to my daughter talk to her friends, and the things that they say, like about, oh, your boyfriend's ugly, or oh, this or that. It's shocking to me, because you would have never said to your best friend, like I would have never said to my best friend, even though I thought it or whatever, which you're not supposed to think like that. You would never say, oh, I don't like your boyfriend, he's ugly. They just have no filter whatsoever.
But yet,
it's becoming a crisis. They're seeing more crime in young adults, like heavier crimes, like robbery and this and that. So, and I think that social media has a
well, they're becoming anesthetized. Because I remember that discussion, and if you notice the reaction to the friends, they moved on. They didn't fight. If we had said that in our generation, hey, what are you saying about my girlfriend? But they didn't react to it, and so it's maybe they're becoming a little anesthetized to things. But again, I think boundaries and barriers are important, and I did this podcast a year or so ago. It's like tearing down authority at our own peril. And we're gonna rip all the hierarchical everything down, and what are we left with? Anarchy, chaos, right? It's tough. I think, though, again, the reality is probably that there's been a lot of great progression in life, and I think to your point, Tina, nothing's really worse than it was before per se. Maybe some things are better, but the majority no longer punches above their weight. It's minorities of groups that are controlling the dialogue through this digital thing. And that's why when we talked about public prayer, it's not for us to go out and be holy rollers, but maybe we have to have a little more courage going forward to speak truth and be true to our best of our ability, right? And let that start to be effusive around us, And I'm starting to see signs of it. I'm starting to see people on all sides. They'll say things, they're had enough of this cancel culture and whatever. And it's like, if one person, I won't talk about the dynamics, but he said, why do we always need everybody to agree with us? Why do we need that validation? We need to know who we are. And if people disagree, so be it, and so I think there's hope.
I saw a Gallup survey did an analysis of month by month with various parties, and this is a little bit of good news in the leak situation, but the partisanship where the other side is seen as truly evil. Today, 31% of Americans identify as Democrats, 31% identify as Republicans, and 42% identify as independents. So there are a lot of people who don't buy into this. We've got to hate the other side.
Yeah, and I think that's true. It's just that we don't like I'm saying we because I'm hopefully all of us. I'm not demonizing anybody, but it's just like I said, the majority is, I don't want to say a silent majority because that connotes something different, but it's just like I just think it's more people out there
Other
aren't.
voices are louder.
Yeah, it's the negative voices that are louder, and they can be louder because they have the tools to be louder now. Whereas before, it didn't happen.
I love what you said about looking at yourself, and Chris Wilson was a wonderful Bible study teacher. We would be in the class, and somebody did a big discussion about how this should be changed, and that, and finally he said, everybody always is pointing out. He said, you should turn that finger and point it at yourself. And I think
He's right.
you've even said, when we talk about the church needs this and that, and you once said, I'll never forget it, I'm going to just start here in this parish, and I'm going to try to change things here.
Oh yeah, it's always from the inside out. I look at anything I do ministry wise as starting from this parish, and then whatever goes out organically, goes out organically. I mean, we've been doing this live for years, other things. There may come a time when it ends, so be it. But it's always, I think I'm going a little bit past time. I think when we get this kind of idea that we're world changers, that's not really right.
Mr. Manitos, can I ask you a question about that? So if that's the case, and I'm asking in terms of, do you think it's going to change? At least in this state, they make you choose a side if you're going to vote in the primary.
Right.
So do you think that seeing the change in numbers will change how politics work, or do you think that they're going to still...
Yellow alert politics.
You said the
I'm
magic
just
word.
asking straight across the board.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you have to be one or the other. I'm just saying straight across the
I'm
board.
teasing you.
Do you think that they will go along with that, or will they still control the narrative?
The problem is the magic word you said, and that's primaries,
Mhm.
because that's when a small percentage of people vote, and there you don't get the independence voice. You get the extremists of both parties.
Exactly. But would you, if you opened it up to independents, get their voice?
Probably.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
think so.
Well, there's a couple of states that do that, yes.
Right. That's what I'm saying. When are they going to just across the board just open it up?
We'll
The
ancient-
Yeah.
Their government to do that.
Okay, so we're going to end on my wife's yellow alert comment.
And everything. in
You have a
moderation.
slight censor, Mary.
The ancient Greeks had it right, and it went into the Bible.
Of course, they were
also.
Greeks.
Moderation.
Everything in
Yeah.
moderation,
I mean,
no
that's-
extreme one way.
Well, if you look,
Are we going to find out who had the bigger brains, the Democrats or the
you know what?
Yeah, I didn't go that far. On that note, talk about.
I'm going to leave the room and you guys can figure it out. Okay.
Come on, we'll get the dead bodies.
Yeah. So, well, I hope this was a good discussion for those of you out there. It was certainly enjoyable in this room. Thanks everybody for coming. I don't know where we're going to go next week. We may stay kind of on this. We'll see where the whole Holy Spirit leads. Hopefully it was edifying. So anyway, I'm sorry we went a little bit past time, but very, very good discussion today. So God bless everyone. Next week is the 29th of January, right? So we'll be back next Sunday. Until then, be well. God bless.